The dust of Copper Hollow still clung to Eliza Harper's throat as she stood in the yard of the Mercer Ranch, watching the lantern of her brother-in-law fade into the night. The deed to her farm was in her pocket. The rain was washing the years of drought from the land, and somewhere behind her in the east bedroom, her youngest daughter was sleeping without fever for the first time in a month. But the weight in her chest was not relief. It was the slow, cold understanding that Richard Harper had not been the only predator on that road. Sheriff Boone had ridden away with him, but there were others. Men in Austin who had signed the forged papers, judges who had looked the other way, a whole county that had watched a widow fall and done nothing. Eliza turned from the porch rail and walked back into the kitchen. Caleb Mercer was still seated at the long table, his leg propped on a second chair, a cup of coffee cooling in his hands. The fire crackled low in the stove, and the shadows stretched long across the floor. "He's gone," she said. Caleb nodded. "He won't come back. Not after what you said to him. He'll send someone else. Or he'll find another way." Caleb set the cup down and looked at her directly. "Then we'll find a way to stand against it, together." The word hung in the air, together. It was a word Eliza had not used since Thomas died. She had been alone in every decision, every step, every tear. And now here was a man who had married her for paper, who had ridden to Austin on a cracked hip, who had come home and kissed her on a dark porch, and who was still sitting at her table as if he had always been there. "Caleb," she said, and his name felt strange on her tongue. "What happens when the paper is not enough? When the law comes again, and the judge is bought, and the sheriff is loyal to the highest coin?" Caleb was quiet for a long moment. Then he pushed himself up from the chair, using the cane for balance. He walked to the window and looked out at the rain falling on the pasture that was finally, blessedly, turning green. "I've been thinking about that since Austin," he said. "There's a man I know in the federal marshal's office. Name is Samuel Reed. He's the kind of man who doesn't take bribes because he doesn't need money. He has a ranch in the Panhandle that his daddy left him, and he works for the law because he believes in it. I sent him a letter from Austin, telling him about the forged deeds and the widows. He wrote back while I was still on the road." Caleb turned from the window and pulled a folded piece of paper from his vest pocket. He held it out to Eliza. She took it and read by the lamplight. The handwriting was neat and firm. "Mrs. Mercer, I have opened an investigation into the land fraud in Copper Hollow and 3 other counties. A federal examiner will be in the district by the end of the month. If the evidence is as you describe, the men responsible will face charges in federal court, where local judges cannot interfere. You and your children are safe for now, but do not leave the ranch. I will send word when the examiner arrives. Samuel Reed, Deputy U.S. Marshal." Asterisk. Eliza read the letter twice. Then she folded it and pressed it against her chest. "Caleb," she whispered, "you did this. While you were gone, you made this happen." He shook his head. "I just wrote a letter. You're the one who walked 8 miles in the sun with a burning baby on your hip. You're the one who stood in the yard and faced down a man with a pistol. I just wrote a letter." Eliza crossed the room and stopped a foot from him. The cane was between them, his hand white-knuckled on the handle. "You gave me a name when I had none," she said. "You gave my girls a roof when they had only dust. You went to Austin for us. You came home for us. That is not just a letter." Caleb's jaw tightened. "Eliza, I told you when we married I wasn't offering a kingdom. I was offering a wall. That's still all I have." "Then it's enough." She said it before she thought it. The words came from somewhere deep, somewhere she had not yet visited in her own heart. Caleb's eyes met hers, and for a moment the kitchen was still. Then Rose's thin voice came from the hallway. "Mama, are you and Mr. Caleb fighting?" Eliza stepped back, breaking the spell. "No, lamb, we're just talking." Rose appeared in the doorway in her nightdress, her feet bare on the cold floorboards. Her hair was tousled, her cheeks pink with returning health. "I heard you say enough." Eliza knelt down and opened her arms. Rose ran into them, and Eliza held her close, feeling the small heartbeat against her own. "I said the roof is enough, and the food is enough, and you are enough, that's all." Rose nodded against her shoulder. "Good, because I like it here. I like the rain, and I like Mr. Caleb. He smells like horses and wood smoke." Caleb let out a short laugh. "That's the best compliment I've had all year, Miss Rose." Rose turned her head and grinned at him. "You're welcome." The next morning, the sun rose over a ranch that was wet and green and alive. Eliza woke early, before the children, before the hands, and walked out to the garden. Lily's seeds had sprouted, thin green shoots pushing through the dark soil. She knelt and touched one with her fingertip. A small miracle. 2 months ago, she had been on her knees in the dirt of a courthouse square. Now she was on her knees in the dirt of her own garden, on land that belonged to a man who had given her his name. She heard footsteps behind her. It was Noah, barefoot, carrying a tin cup of water. He held it out to her. "For the plants, Aunt Eliza. Lily said they need water every morning." Eliza took the cup. "Thank you, Noah." He stood there, shifting from foot to foot. Then he said, "Aunt Eliza, can I help you in the garden today?" It was the longest sentence he had spoken since the funeral. Eliza felt her eyes sting. "You can help me every day, if you want." Noah nodded solemnly and sat down cross-legged in the dirt beside her. They watered the seedlings together in silence. The morning passed in a blur of chores. Margaret helped Hank Prescott mend a fence near the south pasture. Lily and Noah collected eggs from the henhouse. Rose sat on the porch with a bowl of berries, eating them one by one and watching the road. Eliza knew why she watched the road. They all did. Richard Harper was gone, but the world was still full of men who wanted to take. And a federal marshal's letter, no matter how firm, was only paper. That afternoon, a rider appeared on the road. Eliza's heart jumped, but it was not a sheriff. It was a young man in a dusty suit, carrying a leather satchel. He reined in at the gate and called out, "Mrs. Mercer? Eliza Mercer?" Eliza walked to the gate. "I'm Mrs. Mercer." The young man dismounted and handed her a thick envelope. "From the office of the Texas Attorney General, ma'am. A summons for you to appear before the district court in Austin on the 15th of next month. It's about the Harper land case." Eliza took the envelope. Her hand was steady, but her mind was racing. The 15th of next month, that was 3 weeks away. "Who else is summoned?" she asked. "Richard Harper, Sheriff Boone, Judge Mary, and several witnesses from Copper Hollow. The Attorney General has impaneled a grand jury." The young man tipped his hat. "I wish you good fortune, ma'am." He mounted and rode off. Eliza stood at the gate, the envelope heavy in her hand. Caleb came up behind her. "What is it?" "A summons. I have to go to Austin, to testify." Caleb took the envelope and read it. 3 weeks. We'll be ready." "Caleb, I can't take the girls to Austin. It's a 4-day ride. The court could take a week, and Richard Harper's men are still out there." "Then you won't take them. They'll stay here, with me and Hank in the hands. They'll be safe." Eliza looked at him, at the hard line of his jaw and the softness in his eyes. "You would keep them?" "They're my daughters now, Eliza, legally and otherwise. I would die before I let anyone take them." She believed him. The next 2 weeks were a whirlwind of preparation. Eliza sewed a traveling dress from calico she found in Martha Calloway's donation box. Hank Prescott packed a saddlebag with dried meat, hard bread, and coffee. Caleb wrote a letter to Marshal Reed, telling him she was coming. The children knew something was happening, but they did not ask. Margaret understood. Lily watched with her quiet eyes. Rose clung to Eliza's skirts every chance she got. Noah brought her small gifts, a smooth stone, a feather, a hand-drawn picture of a horse. On the night before she left, Eliza sat on the porch after the children were asleep. Caleb came out and sat beside her. "Are you afraid?" he asked. "Yes. So am I." She turned to look at him. "You? What do you have to be afraid of?" "That you'll go to Austin and see what a real city looks like, and you won't want to come back to a dying ranch with a man who limps." Eliza let out a breath that was almost a laugh. "Caleb Mercer, I walked 8 miles with a burning baby and $2 silver. I know what I want, and what I want is right here." He did not answer, but his hand found hers in the dark, and they sat that way until the stars came out. The next morning, Eliza rode out at dawn. She took Hank Prescott's old gelding, a steady animal with a smooth gait. She carried the summons in her saddlebag, along with a small pistol that Caleb had pressed into her hand. "Just in case," he had said. She did not argue. The road to Austin was long and dusty. She passed through towns she had never seen, past fields of corn and cotton, past creeks running brown with spring runoff. She slept in barns and under trees. She ate the hard bread and dried meat. She thought about her daughters every mile. On the third day, she crossed the Colorado River and saw the Capitol building rising on the hill. Austin was bigger than she had imagined. Two-story buildings of stone and brick, crowded streets, merchants calling out their wares. She found a boarding house recommended by Martha Calloway, and the landlady, a stout woman named Mrs. Pettigrew, took her in with a knowing nod. "You're the widow from Copper Hollow," she said. "I've heard about you. Come in, come in. Court starts tomorrow." That night, Eliza lay in a narrow bed and stared at the ceiling. The room was clean, the sheets were soft, and she was utterly alone. She had not been alone since the day Thomas died. Even in the worst moments, there had been her girls, or Caleb, or Hank. Now there was only the creak of the floorboards and the distant sound of a piano from a saloon down the street. She prayed. She prayed for her daughters, for Caleb, for the men in the court who would decide her fate. She prayed that the truth would be enough. In the morning, she dressed in her best calico, pinned her hair up, and walked to the courthouse. It was a grand building with tall columns and a bronze dome. Inside, it smelled of old paper and polish. A clerk directed her to a waiting room where she sat on a hard bench beside a half-dozen strangers. After an hour, her name was called. She stood. The courtroom was full. She saw the Attorney General at a table, a stern man with a white beard. She saw Judge Mary from Copper Hollow sitting in the gallery, his face pale. She saw Richard Harper's chair, empty. The bailiff read the case. State of Texas versus Richard Harper et al. In the matter of fraudulent land transfers and extortion. The Attorney General called her to the stand. She swore on the Bible. She told them everything. The forged deed, the sheriff's boot, the walk to the Mercer Ranch. She told them about the dying horse and the man pinned beneath it. She told them about the marriage of paper and the love that had grown like a garden in drought. She did not cry. Her voice did not shake. When she finished, there was silence. The jury was dismissed for deliberation. It took them 2 hours. They returned with a verdict. Guilty on all counts for Richard Harper, Sheriff Boone, and Judge Mary. Warrants were issued. Eliza walked out of the courthouse into the Texas sun, and she felt the weight of Copper Hollow lift from her shoulders. She had won. She rode home through the green spring countryside. When she crested the last hill and saw the Mercer Ranch below her, she saw the children waiting at the gate. Rose was waving a blue ribbon. Lily was holding Noah's hand. Margaret stood tall and straight, and beside her, leaning on his cane, was Caleb. Eliza kicked the gelding into a trot. She did not stop until she was in the yard, and then she slid off the horse and walked into the arms of her husband, her daughters, her son, her family. She was home, and she was home for good. The morning after Eliza Harper Mercer returned from Austin, the sun came up over the Mercer Ranch like a promise that had been kept. She woke in the east bedroom with Rose curled against her side, and Lily stretched across the foot of the bed like a flung rope. Margaret was already up. She heard the clatter of the stove lid in the kitchen. Eliza lay still for a long moment, feeling the weight of her children around her, the warmth of the Texas morning pressing through the window glass. She had won. The words still felt strange in her mind. She had walked into a courtroom full of powerful men and told the truth, and the truth had been enough. Richard Harper was in a holding cell in Austin, awaiting transport to the state prison. Sheriff Boone had been stripped of his badge. Judge Mary was under investigation. The forged deeds were void. Her farm was hers again, free and clear, though she had not yet decided what to do with it. She rose carefully, stepped over Lily, and walked to the window. The pasture was green. The creek was running. The cattle were fattening. And in the yard below, Caleb Mercer was already at work, mending a harness with Hank Prescott beside him. He looked up as if he had felt her gaze, and he lifted a hand. She lifted hers. Rose stirred behind her. "Mama, is Mr. Caleb making breakfast?" "No, lamb. I suspect that is Margaret." "Good. Margaret's biscuits are better than yours." Eliza turned and raised an eyebrow. "Is that so?" Rose grinned, showing the gap where a tooth had come out. "I love your biscuits too, Mama. But Margaret puts more salt. Eliza laughed. It was the first real laugh she had let out since before Thomas died, and it surprised her. She pressed a hand to her mouth. Rose sat up. "Mama, you laughed." "I did. It sounded nice." Eliza crossed the room and kissed the top of Rose's head. "Come on, lamb, let's go see what your sister is burning." Breakfast was loud and crowded and warm. The kitchen table had been extended with a plank across 2 barrels. Hank Prescott sat at one end, Caleb at the other. Noah had taken the seat beside Lily, their shoulders touching. Rose sat between Eliza and Margaret, dipping her biscuit in molasses. Margaret moved between the stove and the table with the efficiency of a woman twice her age, flipping eggs and pouring coffee. Eliza watched her oldest daughter and saw the tension that had been in her shoulders for months beginning to ease. "Mama," Margaret said, setting a plate of eggs on the table, "I've been thinking. That is always a dangerous thing, Maggie. I want to start school." Eliza paused, a fork halfway to her mouth. "School? There's a schoolhouse in Cedar Springs, 8 miles east. Mrs. Calloway told me. They take girls up to 16. I want to go." Eliza set the fork down. The idea of Margaret leaving the ranch, even for a few hours a day, sent a cold ripple through her chest. But she looked at her daughter's face, the steadiness in her eyes, the set of her jaw, and she knew this was not a whim. This was a girl who had carried her sisters out of Copper Hollow and now wanted to carry herself into the future. "We'll talk about it," Eliza said, "after breakfast." Margaret nodded, satisfied. The rest of the meal passed in a blur of chatter and clattering dishes. Afterward, Eliza found Caleb on the porch, rolling a cigarette with his big, scarred hands. "She wants to go to school," Eliza said, sitting down on the step beside him. "I heard. What do you think?" Caleb lit the cigarette and took a slow drag. "I think she's got more grit than most men I know, and she's smart as a whip. School would give her something she ain't had in a while." "What's that?" "A chance to be a child again." Eliza looked at him. There was no judgment in his voice, only a quiet understanding that made her throat tight. "You're right," she said. "I know." He smiled, a rare thing that softened the hard lines of his face. "You don't have to say it like it hurts. It doesn't hurt. It's just strange, having someone else see her the way I do." Caleb nodded. "That's what family does." They sat in silence, watching the dust motes dance in the morning light. Then a rider appeared on the road, coming fast. Eliza's hand went to her apron pocket, where she still kept the small pistol Caleb had given her. But the rider was young, no more than 12, and his horse was lathered to foam. He reined in at the gate and nearly fell off the saddle. "Mr. Mercer! Mrs. Mercer!" Caleb was on his feet in an instant, the cane forgotten. "Easy, son. What's the matter?" The boy was pale, his shirt torn. "Wagon train, sir. 4 miles north on the Waco Road. Attacked by outlaws. My pa sent me to find help. They've got women and children, and the outlaws drove off the stock. Some folks are hurt bad." Eliza was already on her feet. "Caleb." "I know." He turned to the boy. "How many outlaws?" 8, maybe 10. They rode off when my pa fired a shot, but they'll be back. They took the horses and the mules. We got no way to move." Caleb looked at Eliza. "I'll take Hank and the men. You stay here with the children." "Caleb, I can ride." "I know you can, but I need someone here who can shoot and think. That's you." He held her gaze for a long moment. Then he turned and limped toward the barn, calling for Hank. Within 10 minutes, 6 men were mounted and riding out. Eliza stood at the gate, watching them go, the boy from the wagon train on a fresh horse beside them. She felt the weight of the ranch settle on her shoulders. "Mama," Rose tugged her sleeve, "are they going to fight bad men?" "They're going to help people, lamb." "Will they come back?" Eliza knelt and looked into her daughter's eyes. "They will come back." She said it with a certainty she did not fully feel. The morning stretched into afternoon. Eliza kept the children close. Margaret helped her prepare food and water in case the wounded needed tending. Lily gathered herbs from her garden, yarrow for bleeding, mint for fever. Noah stayed by the window watching the road. Rose played with a rag doll on the porch, her little voice humming a tune. Around 3 o'clock, Eliza saw dust on the horizon. She went inside, checked the pistol, and came back out. The dust resolved into riders, Caleb at the front, Hank beside him, and behind them a slow procession of wagons and walking figures. The wagon train had made it. Eliza ran to the gate. The first wagon was driven by a gaunt man with a bloody bandage around his head. Behind it came a second wagon, crowded with children, their faces dirty and frightened. A woman walked beside the third wagon, carrying a baby in her arms. Caleb rode up to Eliza. "They wouldn't have made it another night without water," he said. "We found them stranded on the open road. The outlaws took everything they had except what they could carry. We gave them what we could spare, but they need a place to rest and resupply." Eliza nodded. "They can stay as long as they need." She walked to the woman with the baby. The woman's name was Sarah Cole. Her husband had been killed in the attack. She had 3 children, the baby, a boy of 6, and a girl of 9. They had been traveling to California where her brother had a farm. Now she had nothing but the clothes on her back and a wagon full of strangers. Eliza took the baby from her arms. "Come inside," she said. "You'll be safe here." That night the Mercer Ranch felt like a small town. The kitchen was full of women and children. Hank Prescott had built a fire in the yard, and the men sat around it, talking in low voices. Eliza moved through the crowd, checking on the wounded, settling disputes over blankets, reassuring the frightened. She found Caleb leaning against the porch rail, watching the fire. "You did a good thing," she said. "Anyone would have done it." "No, Caleb, they wouldn't." He looked at her, the firelight flickering in his eyes. "Maybe not, but you would have. You walked toward the screaming, remember? So did you, today." He smiled, tired and genuine. "I reckon we're a pair." The next morning the wagon train moved on. Sarah Cole had decided to go back to her brother's farm in Missouri, and the other families agreed to escort her. Eliza stood at the gate and watched them go. She felt a hollow place open in her chest, the same hollow that had opened when Thomas died, when she walked out of Copper Hollow, when she left her children to testify in Austin. But this time, the hollow was not empty. It was filled with the knowledge that she had helped, that she had been part of something good. That night, after the children were asleep, Eliza sat on the porch. Caleb came out and sat beside her. "You're quiet tonight," he said. "Just thinking." "About what?" "About Sarah Cole. About what I would have done if I were her, with no husband and no home and 3 children to feed. You were her. 3 months ago you were her, walking down a dusty road with $2 and a burning baby." Eliza shook her head. "I had you. You didn't know me. I found you." He was quiet. Then he said, "Maybe that's the point. You find what you need when you keep walking." She looked at him. His face was half in shadow, but she could see the glint of his eyes, the set of his jaw. "Caleb Mercer, you are a philosopher." "No, ma'am. I'm just a cowboy who got pinned under a horse and had the good sense to be found by a woman who wasn't afraid to empty the sky." Eliza laughed, and this time it was not a surprise. It was a release. She leaned her head against his shoulder, and he did not move away. They stayed that way for a long time, until the stars wheeled overhead and the coyotes began to call from the hills. The next morning, Margaret's school plan was put into action. Hank Prescott drove her to Cedar Springs in the wagon, and she came back that evening with a slate and a primer, and eyes that shone with something Eliza had not seen in her oldest daughter since Thomas died. Hope. "Mama, the teacher, Mrs. Davies, she said I'm ahead of most of the class in reading. And there's a girl named Mary who sat next to me, and her pa lost his farm too, only he drank it away. We talked the whole lunch." Eliza listened to her daughter's chatter with a feeling she could not name. It was not quite happiness. That word felt too small. It was the slow, deep assurance that the world was returning to its proper shape, that the cracks were being filled, that the garden was growing. 2 weeks passed in a rhythm of work and family. Lily's garden flourished under the spring sun. Noah began to talk more, short sentences that grew longer each day. Rose had appointed herself the official greeter of anyone who came to the ranch, and she knew every hand by name. Caleb's leg healed slowly, but he was able to put more weight on it. He rode out with Hank to check the herds, and Eliza found herself watching the road for him, counting the hours until he returned. One evening he came back late. The sun had already set, and the sky was a deep purple. Eliza was on the porch, mending a tear in Margaret's dress. She heard his horse before she saw him, and she stood up. He rode into the yard and dismounted stiffly. "Trouble?" she asked. "No, just a long day. We found a break in the north fence. Could have been a predator, could have been a man. Fixed it." He sat down on the step beside her, his legs stretched out. He rubbed his knee. "Caleb, are you in pain?" "A little. Nothing I can't handle." She set down the mending and knelt beside him. She put her hand on his knee, felt the heat through the denim. "Let me help." He looked at her, surprised. "You don't have to. I want to." She retrieved a tin of liniment from the kitchen, a mixture of wintergreen and camphor that Martha Calloway had given her. She knelt beside him, poured a little into her palm, and began to rub it into the joint. He winced at first, then relaxed. His hand came down and covered hers. "Eliza," he said softly, "you don't have to fix everything. I know. You keep trying anyway." "That's what I do." He took her hand and lifted it gently. He looked at her in the dim light, and she saw the question in his eyes. She answered it by not pulling away. "Eliza, I love you." She had heard those words once before, from a dying man's lips, and they had broken her. But these words did not break her. They found her. "I know," she said. "I love you too." The week that followed was the most peaceful Eliza had known since childhood. She and Caleb moved through the days with a new ease, a glance, a touch, a shared laugh. The children noticed. Rose said, "Mr. Caleb smiles more now." Lily said nothing, but she watched with her quiet eyes and nodded. Margaret, home from school each evening, observed her mother with the careful attention of a girl who had been the woman of the house and was learning to be a daughter again. One night, after the children were asleep, Eliza and Caleb sat on the porch. The moon was full, casting silver light across the yard. "Caleb," she said, "I've been thinking about the farm. My farm, in Copper Hollow." "What about it?" "I want to sell it. I want to use the money to pay down the note on this place." He turned to look at her. "Eliza, that's your land, your husband's land. Thomas's land was stolen from me. You gave it back, and now I want to give it to this family, to our family." He was silent for a long time. Then he said, "You're sure?" "I've never been more sure of anything." He reached over and took her hand. "Then we'll do it together. We'll go to Copper Hollow, sign the papers, and close the door on that place for good." She nodded. "Together. Together." The next morning, Eliza woke to the sound of horses. She pulled on her dress and went to the door. A rider was coming up the road, not Caleb's man, not a neighbor. It was a stranger in a black suit, riding a fine black horse. He stopped at the gate and removed his hat. "Mrs. Mercer?" "Yes." "My name is Calvin Gray. I'm a lawyer from San Antonio. I represent the estate of a man named Thomas Harper." Eliza's blood went cold. "My husband is dead." "I am aware, ma'am, but Mr. Harper had a life insurance policy, taken out 5 years before his passing. The policy was lost in the confusion following his death. It has recently been rediscovered, and it names you as the beneficiary. The payout is $5,000. Eliza felt the world tilt. "5,000? "Yes, ma'am, I have the papers here. You'll need to sign for the transfer." She leaned against the doorframe. Caleb appeared behind her, his hand on her back. "Ma'am, are you all right?" the lawyer asked. "Give us a moment," Caleb said. He guided Eliza inside and sat her down at the kitchen table. "Eliza, breathe." $5,000, she whispered. "Thomas had a policy. He never told me. He worked himself to death paying off Richard's debts, and he had a policy. He wanted you to be safe. Even after he was gone, he wanted you to be safe." Eliza put her face in her hands. She wept. Not for the money, for the love of a man who had known he was dying and had done what he could to protect her, and for the new love that had grown up in that old love's shadow. When she lifted her face, she looked at Caleb. "We can pay off the banknote. We can put the money into the herd. We can build a future." "Yes." She took his hand. "Let's go sign the papers." They rode out that afternoon for Copper Hollow. Eliza sat in the wagon beside Caleb, the deed to her farm in her pocket and the insurance papers in Caleb's. The town looked smaller than she remembered. The dirt streets were the same, the storefronts the same. But the people were not. When they pulled up to the bank, a group of men on the porch of the feed store turned to look. One of them, the butcher who had watched her fall, stepped forward. "Mrs. Harper, Mrs. Mercer, we heard about the trial. We're sorry for how we treated you." Eliza looked at him, at all of them. She did not feel anger. She felt only the weight of the past lifting. "Thank you," she said, and she walked into the bank. An hour later, the farm was sold, the insurance was deposited, and the banknote on the Mercer Ranch was paid in full. Eliza walked out of the bank with Caleb and stood on the boardwalk. She looked down the street toward the courthouse square where she had been kicked into the dirt. She felt the ghost of that pain, but it was faint. "Let's go home," she said. They drove out of Copper Hollow as the sun set, the sky painted in shades of gold and red. Eliza did not look back. She did not need to. The home she had once lost was now behind her. The home she had built was ahead. They reached the ranch after dark. The children were waiting on the porch, a lantern burning beside them. Noah had a tin cup of water ready for Eliza, and Rose launched herself into her arms. "Mama, you're back!" "I'm back, lamb. Did you bring me something?" "I brought you a future." Rose did not understand, but she hugged her mother anyway. That night, Eliza and Caleb walked out to the garden. Lily's seedlings had grown into sturdy plants, and the first flowers were blooming, bluebonnets and Indian paintbrush, wild and bright. Caleb stopped and looked at the sky. "It's clear tonight. You can see every star." Eliza stood beside him. "Look at that," she said softly. "At what?" "At all of it." The stars, the garden, the house full of children, us. He turned to her. "Are you happy, Eliza?" She thought about the girl who had hammered her fists against a courthouse door. She thought about the woman who had walked 8 miles in the sun. She thought about the wife she had become and the mother she had always been. "Yes, Caleb, I am happy." He took her hand. They stood in the garden under the endless Texas sky, and they did not speak. They did not need to. The silence was full of everything they had survived and everything they had yet to build. And that was enough. The morning after Eliza and Caleb returned from Copper Hollow, the sun rose over a ranch that was finally, truly theirs. The banknote was paid. The herd was healthy. The children were safe. And for the first time in 4 months, Eliza Harper Mercer woke without a knot of fear in her chest. She lay still in the narrow bed in the east room, listening to the sounds of the house waking around her. Margaret's footsteps in the kitchen, Lily's quiet voice in the garden, Rose's giggles as she chased a chicken across the yard, Noah's low murmur as he talked to the horses in the corral. It was the sound of a family finding its rhythm. She rose and dressed, her movements unhurried. When she walked into the kitchen, Margaret had coffee ready and biscuits in the oven. Eliza stopped in the doorway and looked at her oldest daughter, 12 years old now, standing at the stove with a flour-dusted apron and a calm that had not been there a month ago. "Mama, you're staring." "I'm marveling." Margaret turned, a small smile on her face. "Marveling at what?" "At you. At all of it." Margaret wiped her hands on her apron and came to stand in front of her mother. She was nearly as tall as Eliza now. "Mama, I've been thinking about something else." "What's that, lamb?" "I want to write a letter. To the women in the Austin Widows' Home, the ones you sent the rent money to. I want to tell them that we made it, that there's hope." Eliza felt her throat tighten. "That's a beautiful idea, Maggie. I got their address from the lawyer who came with the insurance papers. I wrote it down." Margaret pulled a scrap of paper from her pocket. "I'll do it today, after school." Eliza pulled her daughter into a hug, feeling the girl's arms wrap around her waist. "Your daddy would be so proud of you." Margaret held on a little tighter. "I know, Mama. I feel him sometimes. In the morning when the light comes through the window just right. Like he's watching." Eliza pressed her lips to Margaret's hair and said nothing. There was nothing to say. The day passed in a warm blur of small tasks. Eliza helped Lily transplant the bean seedlings into the south garden. She showed Rose how to gather eggs without startling the hens. She sat with Noah in the barn while he brushed the gelding and whispered stories about his mother, stories that came out in fragments, like pieces of a shattered cup being slowly glued back together. In the afternoon, a rider came up the road. This time it was not a lawyer or a sheriff. It was a boy of about 16 with a telegram envelope in his hand. He handed it to Eliza with a nod and rode off before she could ask him to stay for water. She opened the envelope. The telegram was from Samuel Reed, the Deputy U.S. Marshal. It read, "Richard Harper escaped custody last night. Believed heading toward the Panhandle. He may try to reach the ranch. Keep watch. Will send word when apprehended. S. Reed." Eliza read it twice. The knot in her chest returned, cold and hard. She folded the telegram and slipped it into her apron pocket. Then she walked to the barn where Caleb was sharpening a plow blade. He saw her face and stopped working. "What is it?" She handed him the telegram. He read it, and his jaw tightened. "How long ago did he escape?" "Last night. That means he's got a day's head start." Caleb set the blade down and wiped his hands on his trousers. "I'll send Tom to ride the north boundary. Hank can watch the south. We'll double the night watch." "Caleb, he's alone. No horse, no money. He can't get far." "He's desperate. Desperate men do desperate things, and he knows where we live." Eliza looked out the barn door at the children playing in the yard. Rose was chasing a butterfly. Lily was showing Noah how to braid grass. Margaret was sitting on the porch, writing her letter. "I won't let him near them," she said. "Neither will I." They stood together in the barn doorway, watching the innocent scene, and both of them knew that the peace they had found was fragile, that the past was not done with them yet. That night, Eliza gathered the children in the parlor. She sat them down on the settee and took a slow breath. "Girls, Noah, I have to tell you something. Your Uncle Richard has escaped from prison. He might try to come here." Rose's face went pale. Lily's hands stilled in her lap. Margaret set down her pen. "What do we do, Mama?" Margaret asked. "We stay together. We don't go beyond the yard without an adult. We keep the doors locked, and we trust Mr. Caleb and Hank and the men to keep us safe." Noah spoke, his voice small but steady. "I can watch too, Aunt Eliza. I can stay awake." Eliza knelt in front of him and took his hands. "You can watch with me if you want. We'll take turns." He nodded, his chin trembling. "I won't let him hurt anyone." "I know you won't, sweetheart." The next 3 days passed in a state of watchful tension. Every rider on the road was scrutinized. Every sound in the night brought Eliza to the window with the pistol in her hand. The children stayed close. Margaret continued her schoolwork at the kitchen table. Lily spent hours in her garden, but her eyes kept drifting to the horizon. Rose stopped chasing butterflies and started asking questions. "Mama, why does Uncle Richard hate us so much?" Eliza sat down beside her on the porch step. "He doesn't hate us, Lamb. He hates himself. And people who hate themselves sometimes try to hurt the people who remind them of what they could have been." Rose thought about that. "So we remind him of being good?" "Something like that." "Then why doesn't he just be good?" Eliza had no answer for that. On the 4th day, Hank Prescott found tracks. He came riding back from the north pasture, his face grave. "Boss, someone crossed the fence line last night. Tracks lead to the old line shack. I checked it. Someone's been there. Ate some of the stored provisions, left a blanket behind. He's close." Caleb's hand went to his rifle. "How close?" "Maybe 2 miles, heading west. He's circling around, waiting for night." Eliza heard the words and felt the fear rise, but she pushed it down. "Then we'll be ready." That evening, Eliza moved the children into the root cellar. It was a small room beneath the kitchen, lined with shelves of canned goods and dried herbs. She spread blankets on the dirt floor and lit a lantern. "You'll stay here tonight, all of you. Hank will be at the door." "I'll be upstairs with your stepfather," Margaret protested. "Mama, I can help. I can shoot." "I know you can, Maggie, but tonight I need you to keep your sisters and Noah safe. That's the most important job in this house." Margaret's jaw set, but she nodded. She herded the younger ones into the cellar and sat with her back to the wall, a small pistol in her hand that Eliza had given her 2 days before. Eliza closed the cellar door and went upstairs. Caleb was in the parlor, loading his rifle. Hank stood by the window, watching the road. Tom and Pete were on the roof. "He'll come at midnight," Caleb said. "That's when the moon sets. Then we'll be waiting." They sat in the dark, not speaking. The minutes crawled past. The house creaked and settled around them. The wind picked up, rattling the windows. At 11:30, Eliza heard a horse whinny in the corral. Then silence. Then a footstep on the porch. She raised the pistol. Caleb put a hand on her arm and shook his head. He pointed to the window. A shadow moved across it. Then another. Not one man. Two. Eliza's heart hammered. Had Richard found help? The front door rattled. A voice called out low and rough. "Mercer." "I know you're in there. I'm not here to fight. I'm here to talk." It was Richard. Caleb nodded to Hank. Hank unlocked the door and opened it a crack. Richard Harper stood on the porch, alone, his hands raised. He was filthy, his clothes torn, his face gaunt. Behind him, in the yard, was a second figure, a woman in a dusty dress, holding a small child. Eliza stepped forward. "Who is that?" Richard's voice cracked. "That's Mary O'Brien. She was on the wagon train you helped. Her husband died in the attack. She's been walking for 3 days, trying to find you. I ran into her on the road. She didn't know who I was. She just needed help." Eliza looked at the woman. She recognized her, Sarah Cole's neighbor from the wagon train. The baby in her arms was the same one Eliza had held. "Richard, why are you here?" "Because I'm tired, Eliza. I'm tired of running. I heard what you said to me in the yard that night, about dying in a shack in Mexico, and I thought about it, every mile. And I decided I'd rather face a judge than live with myself the way I am now." Caleb stepped forward, his rifle still raised. "You expect us to believe that?" "No. I don't expect you to believe anything. But I brought Mary here because she needed help. That's the only thing I've done right in years. And I wanted to do it before I turned myself in." Eliza looked at the woman. Mary O'Brien's eyes were hollow, but she held the baby close. "Mrs. Mercer," she whispered, "I didn't know where else to go. The wagon train split up after the attack. I've been walking." Eliza lowered the pistol. "Caleb, let them in." Caleb hesitated. Then he nodded and opened the door. Mary O'Brien walked in, collapsing onto the settee. Eliza took the baby from her arms and handed him to Rose, who had come up from the cellar. "Take him to the kitchen, Rose. Warm some milk." Rose nodded and disappeared. Richard Harper stood on the porch, his hands still raised. "I'll go now. I'll walk to Cedar Springs and turn myself in to the sheriff there." "You'll stay," Eliza said, "until morning. Then we'll ride together." Richard's eyes widened. "Eliza, don't make me change my mind." He fell silent. They let him sleep in the barn, under guard. In the morning, Caleb and Hank rode with him to Cedar Springs. Eliza stayed behind, tending to Mary O'Brien and her baby. She fed them, bathed them, gave them clean clothes. Mary cried for 3 hours straight, and Eliza held her hand and said nothing. When Caleb returned that evening, he was alone. "He's in custody," he said. "The marshal is coming to collect him tomorrow. He'll be sent to a federal prison in Louisiana. He won't get out again." Eliza nodded. She felt the last shadow of Copper Hollow lift from her shoulders. Mary O'Brien stayed for a week. During that time, she told Eliza her story. She was 23, from Ohio. Her husband had died of fever 2 years before, and she had married a drifter who promised her a new life in California. He had been killed in the attack. She had no family left. "I don't know what to do," she said one evening, rocking the baby on the porch. "I have nothing. You have your child, and you have time." "Time for what?" "To start over, to find a place where you belong." Mary looked at Eliza, her eyes rimmed red. "How did you do it? How did you keep going after your husband died?" Eliza sat down beside her and thought for a long moment. "I had my children, and I had a road, and I kept walking, that's all. One foot in front of the other, until the road led me somewhere I could rest." Mary was quiet. Then she said, "Maybe I'll try that." The next week, Mary decided to stay in Texas. She found work as a cook at the boarding house in Cedar Springs. Eliza gave her a small amount of money from the insurance payout to help her get started. Mary tried to refuse, but Eliza insisted. "You'll pay it forward," Eliza said. "Someday, when you can, you'll help someone else." Mary agreed, and she did. The summer passed in a golden haze. The ranch prospered, the cattle grew fat. Lily's garden produced enough vegetables to feed the whole household and sell the surplus at the Cedar Springs market. Margaret finished the school year at the top of her class, and Mrs. Davies wrote a letter praising her intellect and character. Rose learned to read. Noah spoke in full sentences now, and he had begun to smile. Caleb's leg healed almost completely. He could ride without pain, walk without a limp. The cane was retired to a corner of the barn. One evening in late August, Eliza found him standing in the doorway of the barn, looking at the sunset. She came up beside him and slipped her hand into his. "What are you thinking about?" "About how different everything is." "A year ago, I was pinned under a dead horse, waiting to die. And now I have a wife, 4 children, a full herd, and a garden that won't stop growing. You forgot Mr. Prescott." "I'd never forget Hank. He'd never let me." They stood in silence for a while. Then Caleb said, "Eliza, I want to do something." "What?" "I want to marry you again, for real this time, in front of a preacher, in a church, with the children watching. I want to say the words that I didn't get to say the first time." She turned to face him, the golden light catching the lines on his face. "You mean the vows?" "I mean everything. Love, honor, cherish. Till death do us part. I said it once, but I didn't mean it then. I mean it now." She reached up and touched his cheek. "I'd like that." "You would?" "Yes, Caleb, I would." The wedding was planned for the first Saturday in October, when the harvest was in and the weather would be cool. Martha Calloway insisted on helping with the arrangements. The church in Cedar Springs was reserved. The women of the town, who had heard Eliza's story, offered to cook and decorate. Hank Prescott, who had never cried in front of another living soul, wept openly when Caleb told him. "I've waited a long time to see you happy, boss." "I'm happy, Hank, for the first time in a long time." On the morning of the wedding, Eliza woke early. She dressed in a simple white dress that Margaret had sewn for her, with delicate lace at the collar. Rose braided her hair. Lily gave her a small bouquet of bluebonnets from the garden. Margaret stood at the door of her room, looking at her mother with an expression that held years of love and memory. "You look beautiful, Mama." "Thank you, Maggie. Daddy would be proud." Eliza's eyes filled. "I think he would be." They rode to the church in the wagon, the children crowded around her. Caleb was waiting at the altar. He had shaved, put on a clean shirt, and borrowed a jacket from Hank that was a size too big, but he did not care. He looked at Eliza walking down the aisle, and his throat tightened. The preacher read the vows. Caleb said his first. "Eliza, I take you to be my wife. I promise to love you, honor you, and cherish you, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, as long as we both shall live." I meant it the first time. I mean it more today. Eliza smiled through her tears. She said hers. "Caleb, I take you to be my husband. I promise to stand beside you, to fight for you, to build a home with you, for as long as the Lord gives us breath. I didn't know what love was when I married you. I do now." The preacher pronounced them husband and wife. Caleb lifted her veil and kissed her, slow and soft, as the children cheered and Hank Prescott blew his nose loudly. That night they danced on the porch of the ranch house. The children danced with them. Rose danced with Noah. Lily danced with Margaret. Hank Prescott danced with Martha Calloway, who had come with her husband. Even Earl Calloway, who had spent years feuding with Caleb, shook his hand and said, "You did all right, Mercer. You did all right." The moon rose over the prairie, silver and full. Eliza leaned against Caleb's shoulder. "Thank you," she said. "For what?" "For not giving up. For riding into that courthouse yard. For marrying a stranger. For loving me." He pulled her closer. "Thank you for walking toward the screaming." She laughed, the sound carrying across the quiet ranch. "We're even then." "No, Eliza, we're more than even. We're whole." They stood on the porch, surrounded by their children, their family, their home. The stars wheeled overhead. The coyotes called from the hills. And Eliza Harper Mercer knew, with a certainty that settled into her bones, that she had found what she had been walking toward all along. She was home. She was loved. And she was never going to leave. The autumn after the wedding settled over the Mercer Ranch like a warm quilt. The harvest was brought in, the hay stacked high in the barn, the root cellar full of potatoes and carrots and preserves. Lily's garden had yielded more than anyone expected, and she had taken to selling her extra vegetables at the Cedar Springs market every Saturday, sitting beside Margaret's bookstall. Margaret had started a small lending library from her own collection, charging a penny a week, and the townswomen had taken to it with surprising enthusiasm. Rose had learned to write her own name, and now left notes for her mother under the coffee cup every morning. "I love you, Mama," in wobbly letters. "Good morning, Mr. Caleb," on the porch step. Noah had begun to hum while he worked, fragments of the river song, and Caleb had caught him teaching the tune to the barn cat. Eliza noticed the changes in her body before she allowed herself to name them. The nausea that came in the mornings, the tiredness that settled into her bones by mid-afternoon, the strange craving for pickled beets that she had never liked before. She kept it to herself for 2 weeks, not wanting to speak the hope aloud until she was certain. But the certainty grew, and on a cool October morning she walked out to the garden where Caleb was helping Lily dig the last of the carrots. "Caleb," she said. Her voice came out steadier than she felt. He looked up, dirt on his hands, a smudge of soil on his cheek. "What is it?" "I need to speak with you, alone." He straightened, exchanged a glance with Lily, and followed Eliza to the far end of the garden, where the sunflower stalks stood brown and tall. She stopped and turned to face him. "I'm with child." The words hung in the crisp air. Caleb's face went through a series of changes: surprise, disbelief, then a slow, dawning joy that spread across his features like sunrise. "Are you certain? I've missed 2 cycles. I know my own body." He let out a breath he seemed to have been holding since the wedding. "Eliza, a baby." "Yes." He reached for her, then stopped, his hands hovering. Are you all right? Is it safe?" "Doc Whitley said after Rose's fever that it might be difficult, but I feel strong. I feel ready." Caleb took her hands, soil and all, and pressed them to his chest. "I don't have words." "Then don't speak, just stand here with me." They stood in the garden, the dry sunflower stalks rattling in the breeze, and the weight of the new life settled between them like a seed planted in good ground. That evening, Eliza gathered the children in the parlor. She sat in the rocking chair that had been Caleb's mother's, and they arranged themselves around her, Margaret on the settee, Lily cross-legged on the floor, Rose in her lap, Noah leaning against the doorframe. "I have something to tell you," she said. "All of you." Rose looked up. "Are we moving again?" "No, lamb, we're staying right here, but we're going to have a new addition to the family." Margaret's eyes widened. "Mama, you mean?" "Yes. In the spring, there will be a baby." The room went silent. Then Rose broke into a grin that showed all her missing teeth. "A baby? Like a real baby? Can I hold it?" "You will be the first in line, Rose." Lily's face was thoughtful. "Will it sleep in my room?" "It will sleep in the east room with me at first, but you can help with the feeding and the rocking." Lily nodded, satisfied. Margaret rose and crossed the room. She knelt beside her mother and put a hand on her knee. "Mama, are you well? Is it safe?" Eliza saw the fear behind her oldest daughter's eyes, the memory of Rose burning with fever, the memory of Thomas slipping away. She covered Margaret's hand with her own. "I am well, Maggie, and I have Doc Whitley watching over me, and I have all of you." Margaret's chin trembled, but she held firm. "Then I'll help. I'll help with everything. I know you will, lamb." Noah had not moved from the doorframe. Eliza beckoned him over. He came slowly, his hands shoved deep in his pockets. "Noah, honey, what do you think?" He looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, "Will it be a brother?" "I don't know yet." "Would you like a brother?" He nodded. "I could teach him things. How to rope, how to sing." Eliza felt her eyes sting. "You would be a fine teacher, Noah." He nodded again, and then he did something he had not done since his mother died. He stepped forward and hugged Eliza, his thin arms wrapping around her neck. She held him, feeling his small body tremble, and she whispered into his hair, "You are my son too, Noah. Never forget that." The next morning, the news spread through the ranch like a prairie fire. Hank Prescott came to the kitchen door with his hat in his hands and a grin on his weathered face. "I hear we're getting a new hand come spring. I'll start teaching him how to ride before he can walk." Caleb laughed. "You do that, Hank, you do that." But the happiness was not without its shadows. That afternoon, a wagon rolled up the long road, driven by a man in a black coat and a woman in a dark dress. They were strangers, their faces set in lines of determination. Caleb met them at the gate. "Can I help you?" The man stepped down. He was tall, with silver hair and eyes that matched the winter sky. "My name is Jeremiah Webb. This is my wife, Esther. We've come about the boy." Noah Mercer. Caleb's hand went to his hip, but he was not wearing a pistol. "What about him?" "He's our grandson. Our son, Daniel Webb, was his father, the man who was hanged in Waco. We've come to take him home with us." The words landed like stones in still water. Eliza had come up behind Caleb, and she felt the blow in her chest. "Mr. Webb, Mrs. Webb, please come inside. We need to talk." In the parlor, the Webbs sat stiffly on the settee. Eliza served them coffee, which they did not touch. Jeremiah Webb spoke first. "We know about Sarah, our daughter-in-law, passing. We know about Noah living here. We've come to take him to Waco. We have a home there, a good home. He should be raised by his blood kin." Caleb set his cup down. "Mr. Webb, Noah has been with us for nearly a year. He has not spoken a word in all that time until recently. He's just starting to heal. To tear him away now would undo everything." "Healing is best done with family," Esther Webb said. Her voice was cold, flat. "We have a right to him." "You have a legal right?" Caleb asked. Jeremiah hesitated. "We have a moral right." "Legal," Caleb pressed. "Do you have a court order?" "Not yet." "But we can get one," Eliza spoke. "Mr. Webb, Mrs. Webb, I understand you have lost a son. I cannot imagine that pain. But Noah has lost both his parents. He has found a home here, with children his age, with people who love him. Taking him away would be a second loss, and he may not survive it." Esther Webb's eyes flashed. "You are not his kin. You are strangers who took him in out of pity. We are his blood." "Blood does not make a family," Eliza said quietly. "Love makes a family. And Noah is loved here." The conversation went on for an hour, but no ground was given. The Webbs left with a promise to return with a lawyer. Eliza watched the wagon disappear down the road, and she felt the fragile piece of the ranch crack like ice under a horse's hoof. That night, Noah came to her room. He stood in the doorway, his face pale. "Aunt Eliza, are they going to take me away?" She held out her arms, and he ran into them. She held him tight, feeling his heart race against hers. "I won't let anyone take you, Noah. You are my son, and I will fight for you as long as I have breath." He buried his face in her shoulder and wept. She rocked him, the baby in her belly a quiet witness, and she prayed. The days that followed were a blur of preparation. Caleb wrote to the lawyer in Austin who had helped with the insurance case. Eliza gathered affidavits from Martha Calloway, from Doc Whitley, from every person who had seen Noah blossom under her care. Margaret wrote a long letter in her neatest hand, testifying to Noah's happiness and progress. Lily drew a picture of the family, all of them together, a stick figure, Noah, at the center. But the Webbs were not idle. A week later, a formal letter arrived, summoning Caleb and Eliza to a hearing in Cedar Springs. The judge would decide Noah's custody. The night before the hearing, Eliza could not sleep. She walked out onto the porch, wrapping a shawl around her shoulders. The stars were out, cold and sharp. After a moment, the door opened, and Noah came out, carrying a tin cup of water. "I thought you might be thirsty," he said. She took the cup. "Thank you, honey." He sat down beside her, his legs dangling over the edge of the porch. "Aunt Eliza, what if the judge sends me away?" "Then I will appeal. And if I lose the appeal, I will ride to Waco myself and bring you back." "Would you really do that?" "Noah Mercer, I walked 8 miles with a burning baby on my hip. I walked into a courtroom full of powerful men and told them the truth. I would walk to the ends of this earth for you." He was silent for a long time. Then he leaned his head against her shoulder. "I love you, Aunt Eliza." She pressed a kiss to the top of his head. "I love you too, Noah. More than all the stars in the sky." The hearing was held in the small courthouse in Cedar Springs. The room was crowded. Martha Calloway, Doc Whitley, Hank Prescott, the children. Jeremiah and Esther Webb sat on one side of the aisle, stiff and silent. Eliza felt the baby kick as she took her seat beside Caleb. Judge Tompkins was an old man with a kind face and a reputation for fairness. He reviewed the affidavits, listened to the arguments. Jeremiah Webb spoke of blood ties and family duty. Caleb spoke of Noah's healing, his first words, his love for the horses and the garden. Eliza spoke of the boy who had brought her water every night, who had hummed the river song, who had learned to smile again. When the testimony was done, Judge Tompkins leaned back in his chair. "I have seen many custody cases in my time. Most of them are about adults fighting over children like property. This one is different. This one is about a boy who has been given a second chance at a family." He looked at Jeremiah Webb. "Mr. Webb, you are the boy's grandfather. That is a sacred title. But being a grandfather does not mean you are the best home for him. The evidence before me shows that Noah Mercer has thrived under the care of Caleb and Eliza Mercer. He has begun speaking again. He has formed bonds with his cousins. He has a home, a garden, a future." Jeremiah Webb opened his mouth, but Judge Tompkins raised a hand. "I am ruling that Noah Mercer shall remain in the custody of Caleb and Eliza Mercer, with visitation rights granted to the Webbs if they choose to exercise them. This is the best interest of the child." Esther Webb burst into tears, not of joy, but of anger. Jeremiah helped her from the courtroom without another word. Noah ran to Eliza and buried his face in her skirts. She knelt and held him, feeling the sobs shake his small frame. "You're safe," she whispered. "You're home." That evening the ranch celebrated. Hank Prescott roasted a whole pig. The children stayed up past midnight. Margaret played her mother's old guitar, badly but happily. Lily and Noah danced a jig on the porch. Rose fell asleep in Caleb's lap. As the fire burned low, Caleb put his arm around Eliza. "We did it. We did it. Now we just have one more thing to wait for." She put a hand on her belly. "Spring will be here before we know it." He kissed her temple. "I can't wait." The winter came, cold and bright. Eliza grew round and slow. The children took over the chores with a diligence that made her heart ache. Margaret managed the household with quiet competence. Lily kept the fire stoked and the kitchen full of herbs. Rose read to the baby in her belly every night, pressing her ear to Eliza's stomach and reporting on the baby's reactions. Noah followed Caleb everywhere, learning the work of the ranch, the names of the stars, the songs of his mother. On a frozen January morning, the letter arrived. It was from the state prison in Louisiana. Richard Harper had died of a fever 3 weeks earlier. He had written a final letter, which was enclosed. Eliza opened it with trembling hands. The handwriting was shaky, the words cramped. "Eliza, I am dying. I have no right to ask for forgiveness, so I will not ask. But I want you to know that I am sorry. For everything. For Thomas. For the farm. For the pain I caused you and the girls. I was a coward and a thief, and I die knowing it. Take care of my nieces. Tell them their uncle loved them, even if he did not know how to show it. Give Noah a good life. You already have. In the end, I found something I never had before, peace. It came too late. I hope you have found yours. Richard." Eliza read the letter twice. Then she folded it and put it in the drawer where she kept Thomas's ring and the deed to the farm. She did not cry, but she said a prayer for the soul of a man who had been lost and had found his way, at the very last moment, toward the light. Spring came in a rush of green and bloom. Lily's garden exploded with life. The cattle dropped calves in the north pasture, and on the 15th of April, as the sun was setting over the hills, Eliza Harper Mercer went into labor. The birth was long and hard. Doc Whitley stayed by her side through the night. Margaret held her hand. Caleb paced the hall. Rose and Lily and Noah sat in the kitchen with Hank Prescott, saying the rosary they had learned from Martha Calloway. At dawn, the cry came. Caleb burst through the door. "Eliza!" She was propped against the pillows, sweating and exhausted, but smiling. In her arms, wrapped in a white blanket, was a tiny red-faced boy with a tuft of dark hair. "He's here," she whispered. "He's perfect." Caleb crossed the room and knelt beside the bed. He touched the baby's cheek with a finger that trembled. "He looks like you, Eliza. He has your hands. He has his mother's strength." Margaret leaned in, tears streaming down her face. "Mama, what's his name?" Eliza looked at Caleb. They had discussed many names over the winter, but in the end, there had been only one choice. "His name is Thomas Caleb Mercer, after the man who gave me the courage to walk and the man who caught me when I arrived." Caleb bowed his head. When he looked up, his eyes were wet. "Thomas Caleb Mercer. Welcome to the world, son." The children came in one by one. Rose climbed onto the bed and stared at the baby as if he were a miracle made of glass. Lily touched his hand and whispered, "He's so small." "He'll grow," Eliza said. Noah stood at the foot of the bed, his face serious. "Aunt Eliza, can I be his big brother?" "You already are, Noah. You already are." He smiled, a wide, unguarded smile that lit up his whole face. And in that moment, Eliza saw the boy he would become, a man of strength and gentleness, a man who had learned to heal. Caleb leaned down and kissed Eliza's forehead. "We did it. We didn't do it alone. We had a lot of help. We had each other. That was enough." The sun rose higher, pouring gold into the east room. In the yard, Hank Prescott was telling the hands that the Mercer Ranch had a new boss. In the garden, the bluebonnets were blooming. And in the bedroom, where a baby had been born, and a fever had been broken, and a widow had become a wife, a family gathered close, broken, mended, and whole. Eliza looked at her husband, her children, her son, and she knew the long road from Copper Hollow had led exactly where it was meant to go. She was home, she was loved, and she would never have to walk that road alone again. 2 years and 1 long summer had passed since Thomas Caleb Mercer drew his first breath in the east bedroom. The boy was a toddler now, with his mother's dark hair and his father's steady gaze, and he ruled the Mercer Ranch with a grip as fierce as any cattle baron. He followed Hank Prescott everywhere, toddling after him to the barn, the corral, the garden, his small legs pumping, his voice calling, "Hank! Hank!" in a tone that brooked no refusal. Hank pretended to grumble, but everyone saw the way his weathered hand would find the boy's head, resting there like a blessing. The children had grown too. Margaret was 14, nearly a woman, tall and composed, with a quiet authority that made even the ranch hands pause when she spoke. She had taken over the household accounts, keeping the books with a neat hand and a sharper eye than Caleb's. Lily was 11, still quiet, still watchful, but her garden had become the envy of the county. She sold seeds and cuttings now, and had a small purse of her own that she kept under her bed. Rose was 8, a whirlwind of freckles and questions, and she had appointed herself the official caretaker of Thomas, a role she took with a solemnity that never lasted more than 5 minutes before she was chasing him around the yard. Noah was 11 as well, tall for his age, his shoulders broadening from the ranch work. He spoke in full sentences now, and he had taken to sitting with Eliza in the evenings, reading from the Bible or the Austin Statesman, his voice growing stronger with every page. On a sweltering afternoon in July, a rider came up the long road. He was not a farmer or a drifter. He wore a stiff collar and a vest, and he carried a leather satchel strapped across his saddle. He reined in at the gate and removed his hat, revealing a high forehead and eyes that moved too quickly. "I'm looking for Caleb Mercer," he said. Caleb stepped out of the barn, wiping his hands on a rag. "I'm Mercer." The man dismounted and extended a hand. "Name is Horace Pemberton. I represent the Southwestern Railroad and Development Company." The name meant nothing to Caleb, but he shook the hand out of habit. Pemberton opened his satchel and pulled out a roll of papers. "Mr. Mercer, the railroad is laying a new line from Abilene to the Gulf. It's going to change everything along this corridor. We're acquiring land for the right-of-way, and your property sits directly in the path." Caleb's expression did not change. "How much land?" 300 feet wide, running north to south across the eastern edge of your property. About 40 acres total, cutting through your best pasture and the creek that feeds your south tank. The creek feeds every tank on this ranch. I understand that. That's why we're prepared to offer you a generous compensation. Pemberton named a figure. It was not nothing, but it was less than the land was worth, and it did not account for the loss of water. Caleb folded his arms. I'm not interested. Pemberton's smile did not waver. Mr. Mercer, the railroad has the right of eminent domain. We can take the land with or without your consent. The compensation will be determined by a court-appointed appraiser. I'm offering you a chance to negotiate a fair price before that happens. Then go to court. Pemberton's smile tightened. I'll give you a week to reconsider. He mounted his horse and rode away, leaving a cloud of dust and a cold knot in Caleb's stomach. That evening, the family gathered around the kitchen table. Eliza listened as Caleb explained the situation. Her hands were folded in her lap, but her knuckles were white. Can they really take our land? Margaret asked. They can try, Caleb said, but they'll have to prove the line serves the public good, and we can fight that. With what? Eliza asked quietly. We're not rich men with lawyers on retainer. We have the law on our side. We have the Attorney General's office from the Harper case. That was about fraud. This is about money. Different kind of fight. Noah spoke up. Mr. Caleb, I heard in town that the railroad has been buying up land all along the river. They're offering good money to some folks and threatening others. Folks are scared. Caleb nodded slowly. I reckon that's the plan. Divide and conquer. Rose, who had been listening with wide eyes, said, Are they going to take our house? No, lamb, Eliza said firmly. No one is taking our house. But the fear was there, a familiar ache in her chest. She thought of the dusty road, the $2 silver, the long walk to a stranger's ranch. She had fought for this home once. She would fight for it again. The week passed in tense preparation. Caleb rode to see a lawyer in Austin, a young man named Graves, who had helped with the insurance case. Graves reviewed the railroad's claim and shook his head. Eminent domain is powerful, Mr. Mercer. The courts usually side with the railroad, especially if the line is deemed essential to commerce. Your best chance is to prove that the route can be moved without significant cost. That means hiring a surveyor, finding an alternate path, and presenting evidence to the commission. How much will that cost? Graves named a figure that made Caleb's jaw tighten. It was more than the ranch's entire profit for the year. I'll find a way, Caleb said. He returned home with a heavier heart than he had left with. He did not tell Eliza the full extent of the cost, but she saw it in his face. Caleb, what did the lawyer say? It's going to be a fight, a long one, and it's going to cost more than we have. Then we'll raise it. We'll sell the extra herd. I'll take in washing. The children can work. Eliza, I won't have you. You won't have me what? Sit back while they take our home? I have walked further than you know, Caleb Mercer. I have lost everything and built it back. I will not lose it again. He looked at her, and the fire in her eyes was the same fire he had seen in the dry creek bed the day she had killed a horse for him. All right, he said. We fight. The next morning, a second rider appeared. This one was older, with a salt and pepper beard and a saddle worn smooth from years of use. He introduced himself as Orrin Tate, a surveyor from Dallas County. I heard about your trouble with the railroad, he said. I've had my own run-ins with them. I lost my farm to the same company 15 years ago. I've been fighting them ever since, on paper and in the field. If you'll have me, I'll survey your land for free and help you find an alternate route. Eliza looked at Caleb. Caleb extended his hand. We'd be honored, Mr. Tate. Tate spent the next 2 weeks on the Mercer Ranch. He rode every boundary, mapped every creek and ridge, and spent long evenings at the kitchen table drawing lines on parchment. The children took to him. Rose brought him coffee. Lily showed him her garden. Noah rode with him, learning the names of the tools and the angles of the land. On the last day of his survey, Tate gathered the family in the parlor. I've found a route, he said. It runs a half-mile east of your property line, along the ridge. The ground is solid, the grade is gentle, and it doesn't cross any water source that would affect your ranch. It adds 3 miles to the line, but it's feasible. I've drawn up the maps and the engineering notes. You'll need to present them to the Railroad Commission in Austin. How long will that take? Caleb asked. Commission meets in 6 weeks. You'll need to file a petition before the end of the month. 6 weeks. It was not much time, but it was a chance. The family worked through the summer. Caleb and Hank drove the remaining herd to market and sold them at a fair price. Margaret took on extra tutoring in Cedar Springs. Lily sold her seeds and cuttings to every farmwife in the county. Eliza took in mending and sewing, working by lamplight after the children were asleep. Noah helped Mr. Tate with the final maps, his handwriting growing neat and precise. The petition was filed on the last day of the month. The family gathered around the kitchen table as Caleb sealed the envelope. "Now we wait," he said. The waiting was the hardest part. The days grew long, the heat oppressive. Thomas developed a cough that kept Eliza up at night. She sat with him in the rocking chair, watching the stars wheel past the window, praying. One evening, as the sun set in a blaze of orange, a wagon came up the road. It was not the railroad. It was Jeremiah and Esther Webb. They had not been seen since the custody hearing. Eliza's first instinct was to protect Noah, but the Webbs climbed down slowly, their faces lined with age and something that might have been regret. "Mrs. Mercer," Jeremiah Webb said, removing his hat, "we came to apologize." Eliza stood on the porch, her arms crossed. "Apologize for what?" "For trying to take the boy. We were wrong. We were grieving our son, and we thought blood was the only bond that mattered. But we've watched from a distance. We've seen how he's grown. He's happy. He's healthy. He's your son." Esther Webb stepped forward. "We don't want to take him away. We want to be part of his life, if you'll allow it. As grandparents, nothing more." Eliza looked at them for a long moment. Then she turned and called inside, "Noah, come here." Noah appeared in the doorway. He saw the Webbs and stopped. "Noah," Jeremiah said, his voice rough. "We're your grandparents. We don't expect you to call us anything, but we'd like to know you, if that's all right." Noah looked at Eliza. She nodded. He stepped off the porch and walked to the wagon. He stood before Jeremiah and Esther, a boy of 11, tall and serious. "You're my daddy's parents," he said. "Yes," Esther whispered. "My daddy was a good man. They hanged him for something he didn't do." "We know," Jeremiah said. "We tried to stop it. We couldn't." Noah was silent for a moment. Then he reached out and took Esther's hand. "Would you like to see my garden?" he asked. Esther's face crumpled. She nodded. Noah led her toward the garden, and Jeremiah followed, his hat in his hands. Eliza watched them go, her hand pressed to her chest. Caleb came up beside her. "Did you see that?" she whispered. "I saw it. The power of a child's heart. The power of love," he said. "And a good garden." The Webbs stayed for supper. It was an awkward meal, full of careful words and hesitant glances, but it was a beginning. Noah sat between his grandparents, and at one point Esther reached over and touched his hand. He did not pull away. After supper, as the stars came out, the Webbs climbed into their wagon. "We'll come back," Jeremiah said, "if you'll have us." "You're always welcome," Eliza said. They drove away, and Noah stood on the porch, watching the lantern sway in the dark. "Aunt Eliza." "Yes, Noah. I think I'm going to be all right." She put her arm around his shoulders. "I think you already are, son." The next morning, a telegram arrived from Austin. "Your petition has been received. The Commission will hear your case on September 15th. Please bring your survey maps and all supporting documents. Expect a decision within 48 hours. The Southwestern Railroad Development Company has filed a countersuit seeking expedited eminent domain. The court will hear both cases simultaneously. Be prepared for a fight." Eliza read it aloud at the breakfast table. The children looked up from their bowls. "A fight," Margaret said. "We've done that before." "We have," Eliza said, "and we've won before. But this time," Lily said quietly, "we have more to lose." Eliza looked around the table at her family, at Caleb, whose hand rested on Thomas's head, at Margaret, already planning the arguments, at Lily, whose garden had fed them, at Rose, who had not stopped believing in miracles, at Noah, who had learned to hope again. "Then we make sure we have more to fight with," Eliza said. "We gather every ally we have. We write every letter. We tell every story." "Every story?" Rose asked. "Every story. Of how we found this ranch, of how we built this family, of how we will not be moved again. Caleb reached across the table and took her hand. Then we fight. And in the quiet that followed, with the morning light pouring through the kitchen windows and the scent of coffee and biscuits hanging in the air, the family of the Mercer Ranch prepared for the hardest battle they had yet faced. The morning of the journey to Austin arrived gray and heavy, with clouds pressing down on the prairie like a lid. Eliza stood at the kitchen window, watching Caleb load the wagon. He moved with a careful economy that she had come to know over the years. Every motion deliberate, every strap checked twice. Hank Prescott was already mounted, his rifle across his saddle, his eyes scanning the horizon out of habit. The children were still inside, finishing their breakfast in a silence that felt thick as molasses. Thomas had woken with a cough. It was a small thing, a dry rasp that came and went. But Eliza had learned to read the signs in her children the way a rancher reads the sky for weather. She had pressed her hand to his forehead and felt the faint warmth beneath the skin. Not a fever, not yet. But the memory of Rose burning in her arms was never far from the surface, and her hand had lingered on Thomas's cheek a moment longer than necessary. "Mama," Margaret said, coming up beside her, "I can stay. I can watch Thomas and the others." Eliza turned. Margaret was 15 now, her face losing the roundness of childhood, her shoulders squaring under the weight of responsibility she had carried since she was 10. "You have the school examination in 3 weeks. You need to study." "I can study here. The books are in my room." "Maggie, I need you in Austin. Your voice, your presence. The commission needs to see the family we are, not just the cattle count and the acreage, but the children who live on this land." Margaret's chin lifted. "Then take Noah. He's good with people. He can talk about the garden, the cows, the way the land healed him. That's worth more than any map." Eliza looked at her oldest daughter, and she saw the truth of it. Noah had become a bridge between the ranch and the world outside. His story, the hanged father, the silent year, the slow return to speech, was a story the commission could not ignore. She reached out and touched Margaret's cheek. "You are wise beyond your years, Margaret Harper." "I learned from you, Mama." In the end, the traveling party was decided. Caleb, Eliza, Noah, and Hank Prescott. Orrin Tate would meet them in Austin with the finalized maps. Lily would manage the household with Margaret. Rose would help with Thomas. Mrs. Calloway had offered to come by each afternoon to check on them. The ranch hands would double the watch. The plan was solid, but the leaving was hard. Eliza kissed each child goodbye at the gate. Rose clung to her leg. Lily stood straight and still, her eyes saying more than her mouth ever did. Margaret held Thomas in her arms, the toddler squirming to be put down. "I'll take care of them, Mama," Margaret said. "I know you will, lamb." "I know." The wagon rolled out as the first drops of rain began to fall. Eliza sat beside Caleb on the bench, Noah in the back with the supplies, Hank riding ahead. The road stretched before them, brown and rutted, leading toward a city where their future would be decided. The rain turned into a steady drizzle that lasted the entire first day. They stopped at a way station near dusk, a low building with a sagging roof and a widow named Mrs. Bell who fed them stew and cornbread without asking for payment. "I heard about your fight with the railroad," she said, setting a bowl before Eliza. "My husband lost his farm to them 20 years ago. He never got over it, died with the deed still in his hand." She looked at Noah, who was eating quietly. "You got a good boy there. You fight hard." Eliza thanked her, and they slept on pallets in the back room, the smell of wood smoke and rain soaking into their clothes. On the second day, the drizzle stopped, and the sun broke through. The prairie opened up, green from the summer rains, dotted with wildflowers. Noah sat forward, pointing at a herd of pronghorn bounding across the grass. "Look, Aunt Eliza, they're running." "They're free," she said. "Are we free?" The question hung in the air. Caleb glanced at her, then back at the road. "We are, son. We're free to fight, free to choose, free to stand our ground." Noah nodded slowly. "Then I'll stand with you." They reached Austin on the evening of the third day. The city had grown since Eliza's last visit. New buildings lined the streets and the noise of commerce filled the air. They found a boarding house near the Capitol, run by a woman named Mrs. Chenoweth, who had a soft spot for underdogs. "Railroad's been bullying folks for years," she said, handing Eliza a key. "You get some rest. Tomorrow, you show them what backbone looks like." In their room, Eliza sat on the edge of the narrow bed, her hands folded in her lap. Caleb came up behind her and placed his hands on her shoulders. "You're thinking about the children." "Always. They're safe. Margaret is stronger than most women twice her age. Lily has a head for details. Rose has more heart than sense, which keeps everyone on their toes. And Thomas has your stubbornness." She leaned back against him. "And Noah. Noah is the best of all of us. He's going to be the one who wins this case." She turned. "What do you mean?" "I mean, the commission can ignore a rancher. They can ignore a lawyer. But they cannot ignore a boy who lost everything and found a family. That's the story they need to hear." Eliza looked at the door, beyond which Noah was unpacking his small satchel. "He's just a boy. He's the boy who didn't speak for a year, and now he speaks for all of us." The hearing was held in a large room in the Capitol building, with tall windows and a dais where the commissioners sat like judges at a trial. There were 5 of them, men in dark suits with stern faces. The railroad's lawyer was a silver-haired man named Thaddeus Grove, who spoke with the smooth confidence of a man who had never been told no. He presented his case with charts and documents, arguing that the Mercer property was the most efficient route, that the public good required the line to pass through it, that the compensation offered was fair. Then Caleb was called to the stand. He spoke simply, without flourish. He described the ranch, the creek that fed the tanks, the cattle that depended on it. He described his family, his wife, his children, the boy who had come to them broken and had been made whole by the land. He described the survey by Orrin Tate, the alternate route, the feasibility. Commissioner Hayes, a man with bushy eyebrows and a skeptical mouth, leaned forward. "Mr. Mercer, you are asking the commission to reject the most efficient route, at significant additional cost to the railroad, to protect a single family's water supply." "Yes, sir." "What makes your family worth that cost?" Caleb was silent for a moment. Then he said, "Because every family is worth that cost. If the railroad can take one ranch today, they can take any ranch tomorrow. The law is supposed to protect the small man from the powerful one. If it doesn't, then what's the point of the law?" A murmur ran through the room. Commissioner Hayes's eyebrows rose. Then Eliza was called. She told the story of Copper Hollow, of the forged deed, the long walk, the dying horse. She told them about Rose's fever and Noah's silence, and the garden that Lily had planted from seeds she had carried in her apron pocket. She spoke of the land as if it were a living thing, a member of the family. "The railroad can move its tracks," she said. "They can survey a new line, build a new bridge, hire more men. But we cannot move our home. This is the only home we have, and we will not leave it." Commissioner Hayes looked at her for a long moment. Then he nodded. Thaddeus Grove rose to cross-examine. "Mrs. Mercer, you are an emotional woman, and your story is compelling, but the facts remain. The railroad has the right of eminent domain. The law is on our side." "The law is a tool," Eliza said, her voice steady, "and tools can be used for good or for evil. The question is which side you choose." Grove's mouth tightened. No further questions. Then the commissioners called for a recess. They would deliberate overnight. The decision would be announced in the morning. The family returned to the boarding house in a state of suspended breath. Eliza sat with Noah on the porch steps as the sun went down. The sky was clear, the first stars emerging. "Aunt Eliza, do you think we won?" "I don't know, Noah. I know we told the truth. That's all we can do." "Will they take our home?" She put her arm around him. "Not without a fight." He leaned into her. "I'm not afraid. Not like I used to be." "What changed?" "You, Mr. Caleb. The garden, the cows, even Thomas when he pulls my hair." He smiled, a small thing. "I belong somewhere now." She held him tight. "You do, Noah. You always will." The next morning they returned to the Capitol. The room was full. Ranchers from the surrounding counties had come, having heard of the case. Orrin Tate sat in the front row. Hank Prescott stood at the back, his arms crossed, his face unreadable. Commissioner Hayes read the decision. After reviewing the evidence and hearing the testimony, the Commission finds that the alternate route proposed by the surveyor Orrin Tate is both feasible and economically reasonable. The Southwestern Railroad and Development Company is hereby directed to pursue this alternate route, leaving the Mercer Ranch water supply intact. A ripple of applause ran through the room. Eliza's hand found Caleb's. Noah let out a breath that seemed to have been trapped in his chest for weeks. Commissioner Hayes raised his hand for silence. However, the Commission also notes that the railroad may appeal this decision to the district court. In the event of an appeal, the railroad may continue to pursue eminent domain through the court system. This is not a final victory. It is a reprieve. The applause died. Thaddeus Grove was already gathering his papers, his face tight. He would appeal. They all knew it. After the hearing, the family gathered in the hallway. Hank Prescott clapped Caleb on the back. Orrin Tate shook Eliza's hand. "I'll file my report with the court. It will hold up." But the shadow of the appeal hung over them. They returned to the boarding house to pack, and as they loaded the wagon, a messenger arrived with a letter. It was from the railroad's legal office. The Southwestern Railroad Development Company intends to appeal the Commission's ruling. We will file a motion in district court within 30 days. In the meantime, we wish to inform you that we have reached an agreement with a neighboring landowner to secure an alternative right-of-way that does not require eminent domain on your property. You may consider this matter closed. Caleb read the letter twice. They're dropping it. Eliza took the letter. Why would they drop it? They had a strong case. Because they found someone else. Someone who sold them the land they need. Who? Caleb's face was grim. I don't know, but I intend to find out. They rode home in a strange mixture of relief and unease. The threat was gone, but the question of who had sold the land gnawed at them. Had a neighbor betrayed them? Had the railroad found a way around them that did not require a fight? The silence was unsettling. They arrived at the ranch as the sun was setting. Margaret ran out to meet them, Thomas in her arms, Rose and Lily behind her. The children were safe. The house was intact. The garden was green. But something was wrong. Eliza saw it in Margaret's face before she spoke. "Mama, while you were gone, a man came. He said he was from the railroad. He said they'd bought the Callaway spread. Mr. Callaway sold them the eastern quarter." Eliza felt the ground shift beneath her feet. Earl Callaway, who had let her use his river, whose wife had become her friend, had sold the land that bordered their property. The railroad would build the line along the southern edge of their ranch, close enough to disrupt the calm, close enough to bring noise and dust and strangers. "Why?" Eliza whispered. "He left a letter," Margaret said. She handed it over. Eliza opened it. The handwriting was shaky, painful. "Mrs. Mercer, I sold the eastern quarter to the railroad. They offered me a price I could not refuse. My wife needs medical care that we cannot afford. I am sorry. I hope you can forgive me. I know I cannot forgive myself. Earl Callaway." Eliza folded the letter. She looked out at the hills, where the sun was sinking in a blaze of red and gold. The railroad would come. Not through their land, but close enough to change everything. She felt Caleb's hand on her back. "What do we do now?" She looked at her family, gathered on the porch. At Noah, who had found his voice. At Lily, whose garden would survive. At Rose, still full of light. At Margaret, who had carried the weight. At Thomas, who would grow up on this land, no matter what. "We do what we have always done," she said. "We stay. We work. We love. And we wait to see what comes." She took Caleb's hand, and together they walked into the house that was still theirs, for now, and would be theirs as long as they had the strength to hold it. The future was uncertain, but the present was theirs, and that was enough. The first train came through on a Tuesday afternoon in October. Eliza heard it before she saw it, a low rumble that grew into a shaking of the earth, a wail of the whistle that carried across the prairie like a living thing. She was in the kitchen, rolling out dough for biscuits, and her hand stopped. The children had been waiting for this day. Rose had been asking every morning for a week when the iron monster would come. Lily had drawn a picture of it, all angles and smoke, and pinned it to the wall of the parlor. Noah had said nothing, but he had been watching the southern horizon with the same quiet vigilance he had once used to watch for his Uncle Richard. Thomas had been too young to understand, but he had felt the tension in the house and had taken to clinging to his mother's skirts. The rumble grew. The kitchen window rattled. Rose ran to the door and flung it open. "Mama, it's coming!" Eliza wiped her hands on her apron and walked out onto the porch. Caleb was already there, standing at the rail, his face unreadable. Hank Prescott came up from the barn, leading the children behind him. They all watched as the train appeared on the distant ridge, a black snake moving along the new tracks that had been laid across the eastern quarter of the Callaway spread. It was a long train, 20 cars or more, and it moved with a heavy, grinding motion that seemed to shake the sky. Rose stood at the gate, her small hands gripping the top rail, her face turned up toward the approaching monster. "It's so big!" Lily came to stand beside her. "It's loud." Noah said nothing. He was standing apart, his arms crossed, his eyes fixed on a point far beyond the train. Eliza watched him. She saw the shadow that crossed his face, the flicker of something that might have been memory, or might have been fear. The last time the world had come crashing in with noise and strangers, his father had died. The train passed. It was not close enough to shake the house, but the sound of it filled the air, and the smoke from its stack drifted across the sun. Minutes passed. The train grew smaller, the sound faded, and the prairie settled back into silence. But it was a different silence now, thinner, as if something had been taken from it. Rose turned to her mother. "Mama, will it come back?" "Yes, lamb, it will come back. Twice a day, the railroad says." "Forever?" "Forever." Rose thought about that. Then she nodded and ran back to the house, her interest already moving on to the next question. But Lily stayed at the gate, her eyes still on the distant tracks. "Mama, will the smoke hurt my garden?" Eliza came to stand beside her. "I don't know, baby. We'll have to see. Then I'll plant things that are strong enough to survive." Eliza put her hand on her daughter's head. "That's all any of us can do, Lily. Plant what is strong enough to survive." The days passed. The train came and went, a rhythm that slowly became part of the fabric of life on the ranch. The children stopped running to watch it. The horses stopped shying at the whistle. The garden survived the smoke with only a little yellowing on the leaves of the beans. The creek still ran. The cab still dropped. The family still gathered around the kitchen table each evening. But something had shifted. The world was closer now. The tracks brought news from outside, newspapers and letters and travelers who sometimes stopped at the ranch to ask for water or directions. Eliza received a letter from the Webbs, written in Esther's careful hand. They were coming for a visit in the spring. They wanted to see Noah for his birthday. Eliza wrote back and said they were welcome. One evening in November, Caleb came in from the north pasture with a look on his face that Eliza had not seen before. Not worry, not anger, but something softer, something like wonder. "Eliza, come with me." She took off her apron and followed him out into the evening. The sun was setting low, painting the sky in layers of orange and pink. He led her past the barn, past the corral, to the top of a rise that overlooked the entire ranch. In the distance, the tracks gleamed like a silver thread. "Look," he said, pointing west. She looked. The sky there was clear, unbroken by smoke, stretching to the horizon in a long sweep of gold and green. "That's still ours," he said. "All of it. The railroad took a piece, but it didn't take the whole. And it never will." She leaned against him. "How do you know?" "Because we're still here. Because the garden is still growing. Because Noah spoke today. A whole sentence." He said, "The train sounds like my daddy's heartbeat." Eliza felt a catch in her throat. "He said that?" "He said that. And I knew then that this place is stronger than any engine, than any track, than any company that comes through. Because the people on this land have hearts that are still beating." They stood on the rise until the stars came out. The coyotes began to call. The night wind moved through the grass. And Eliza felt the peace she had been seeking since she left Copper Hollow settle into her bones. That winter was cold, colder than any they had experienced on the Mercer Ranch. The creek froze solid for 3 weeks. The cattle huddled in the barns. Lily's garden went dormant under a blanket of frost. Thomas learned to walk, and he took his first steps across the kitchen floor into his father's waiting arms. Noah continued to grow, his voice deepening, his shoulders broadening, his laughter becoming more frequent. He had begun to carve small figures from wood, horses and cows and birds, and he filled the windowsills with them. In January, a letter came from Austin. The railroad had completed its line to the Gulf. The first shipment of cattle from the Panhandle had arrived in Houston in record time. The company had announced plans to extend the line westward, bypassing the Mercer Ranch entirely. The new route would run 50 miles north. They would not need to take any more land. Caleb read the letter aloud at the breakfast table. "We made it," he said. "We're safe." The children cheered. Rose danced around the kitchen. Lily smiled a small, quiet smile. Margaret set down her coffee and looked at her mother, and there was something in her eyes that Eliza understood. A closure, a completion, a chapter ending. "Mama," Margaret said, "I've been thinking about something." "What is it, Maggie?" "I want to apply to the normal school in Austin, to become a teacher." The room went quiet. Eliza set down her fork. "Texas Normal School. It's a 2-year program. I would live in Austin with Mrs. Chenoweth. She's already agreed to take me in. I could come home in the summers." Eliza looked at her daughter. Margaret was 16 now, a woman nearly. She had carried the family on her shoulders for years, and now she was ready to carry herself. "Have you written to the school?" "I have. I'm waiting for a reply." "What about your studies here?" "I've been studying the teacher's curriculum on my own. Mrs. Davies has been helping me. She says I'm ready." Eliza reached across the table and took her daughter's hand. "I am so proud of you, Margaret Harper. If this is what you want, we will find a way. I have some money saved from the tutoring, and Mrs. Chenoweth said I could work at the boarding house for room and board." Caleb spoke up. "Whatever you need, Margaret. Books, travel, fees. We'll cover it." Margaret's eyes filled with tears. "Thank you, Mr. Caleb. Call me Pa," he said, "if you want." The words hung in the air. Then Margaret smiled, her whole face brightening. "All right, Pa." It was a small thing, a single syllable, but it landed in the room like a stone dropped in still water, and the ripples spread to every corner of the family. Spring came with a rush of green. Lily's garden returned, stronger than ever. She had used the winter to learn about soil composition from a book that Orrin Tate had sent her, and she had added a composting system that produced richer earth than anything she had ever worked with. Her seedlings shot up faster, her beans grew fuller, and the bluebonnets that edged the garden bloomed in a carpet of color that drew travelers from the road. Noah turned 12. The Webbs came for his birthday, driving a wagon filled with gifts and a cake that Esther had baked. They sat on the porch and watched Noah blow out the candles. He made a wish, and when Eliza asked him what it was, he said, "I wished that we could all stay together, just like this." Jeremiah Webb shook Caleb's hand at the end of the visit. "You've done right by that boy," he said. "We see it now. We're grateful." "We're grateful he has you," Caleb replied. The Webbs drove away, and Noah stood on the porch, waving until the wagon disappeared. Then he turned to Eliza. "Aunt Eliza, can I help you with the new calf? The one that was born last night." "You can, honey. You can name her if you want." He thought about it. "I'll call her Esther, after Grandma." Eliza put her arm around him. "That's a fine name, Noah." In April, Margaret received her acceptance letter from the Texas Normal School. She would leave in August. The family celebrated with a dinner that lasted until midnight, with music and stories and laughter. Hank Prescott told the story of the first day Eliza had arrived at the ranch, covered in blood and dust, carrying a knife and a baby. The children had heard it 100 times, but they listened as if it were new. "Mama," Rose said, "were you really that brave?" "I wasn't brave, lamb. I was desperate." "Same thing," Caleb said. "Desperation is just bravery with no other options." In June, a heat wave settled over the prairie. The creek shrank to a trickle. The grass faded from green to brown. The hands worked from dawn to dusk, hauling water, checking the cattle. Eliza worked alongside them, her sleeves rolled up, her face sunburned, her hands calloused. Caleb watched her from the porch one evening, and he could not believe that this woman had walked 8 miles with a burning baby on her hip. "Eliza," he said as she came up the steps, "you've been working all day. Come sit." "I can't sit. I need to check on Thomas. He's been coughing." "I checked him an hour ago. He's sleeping. Rose is reading to him." "How is your leg?" "Fine. I'm not the one who's been digging irrigation ditches all day." She sat down beside him. "We'll need another well, or we'll have to drive the herd farther south. We'll figure it out. We always do." She leaned her head against his shoulder. The evening was quiet, the air thick and still. In the distance, a train horn sounded, a long, low note that carried across the prairie. "Does it still bother you?" Caleb asked. "The train? No, it's just a sound now. What about the rest of it? Copper Hollow, the Harper trial, the banknote." She thought about it. "It's like the tracks. It's still there, but it's been laid down. I don't have to walk it again." He kissed her temple. "That's good." In July, the rains returned. They came in a series of thunderstorms that rolled across the prairie, dumping sheets of water that filled the creek to the brim and turned the grass overnight. The heat wave broke. Lily's garden surged. The cattle drank from full tanks. The air smelled of wet earth and sage. And in that month, Noah Mercer found his voice fully. He came into the kitchen one morning and said, "Aunt Eliza, I want to tell you something." She sat down at the table. "I'm listening." He sat across from her, his hands clasped in front of him. "I remember my daddy. I remember him hanging. I remember my mama not eating. I remember not wanting to talk. But I don't remember those things the same way anymore. I remember them like they happened to someone else, someone I used to be. And that someone is gone now." Eliza reached across the table and took his hands. "Noah, that is the bravest thing I have ever heard anyone say." "It's not brave, it's just true. You and Mr. Caleb and the girls, you made me into someone new, and I'm grateful. That's all I wanted to say." She pulled him into a hug and held him. He was not a little boy anymore. He was taller than she was, and his voice had dropped, and he had a mustache coming in faintly above his lip. But in that moment, he was still her boy, the boy who had brought her water every night, the boy who had hummed the river song with her. In August, Margaret left for Austin. The whole family gathered at the gate to see her off. She was dressed in a new calico dress that Eliza had sewn for her, and she carried a carpet bag that held her books and her letters and a small photograph of the family. "Noah, you'll write to me," she said. "Every week," he said. "Lily, you'll keep the garden growing." "Always," Lily said. "Rose, you'll take care of Thomas." "I will, Maggie, I promise." "And Mama," Margaret's voice cracked. "You'll be all right." Eliza pulled her daughter into her arms and held her. "I'll be all right because I know you will be. Go, learn, become the teacher you were meant to be." Margaret climbed into the wagon beside Hank Prescott, who would drive her to the station. As the wagon pulled away, she turned and waved. The family waved back. The wagon crested the rise and disappeared. Eliza stood at the gate, watching the dust settle. Caleb came up beside her. "She'll be fine." "I know." "You're crying." "No, I'm not." "Yes, you are." He put his arm around her. "It's all right to cry, Eliza. She's your firstborn. She's the one who carried your girls out of Copper Hollow. She's the one who held the family together while you were fighting. Let her go." Eliza wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "I am letting her go. I'm just letting her go slowly." The fall brought cooler weather and a bumper crop of hay. The barns were full, the cattle were fat. The family gathered the harvest with a rhythm that felt timeless, a cycle that had been repeated on this land long before they arrived and would continue long after they were gone. Lily's garden had produced more than she could sell. She had preserved enough vegetables to feed the family through the winter, and had enough left over to donate to the church in Cedar Springs. The preacher wrote a letter of thanks that she framed and hung in her room. Noah had taken over the care of the horses. He had a natural gift with him, a patience that earned their trust. Caleb watched him work and said nothing, but Hank Prescott saw the pride in his face. Rose had started school, and she had already been in 2 fights. Both times she had won. "She's got your spirit," Caleb told Eliza. She's going to be a force." Thomas had grown from a toddler into a small boy, with his father's steady gaze and his mother's stubborn jaw. He followed Noah everywhere, and Noah let him, teaching him the names of the stars, the calls of the birds, the songs of the river. One evening in November, Eliza sat on the porch with Caleb. The sky was clear, the stars sharp and cold. The train had passed an hour ago, and the silence had returned. "Do you remember the day we met?" she asked. "I remember every second of it. You came sliding down that bank with a knife in your hand, and all that dust in your hair. I thought I was dreaming. I thought you were dying." "I was, and then you showed up." She leaned into him. "What do you think comes next for us, Caleb? After all this? After the children grow up and the ranch runs itself and the trains stop being new? I think we sit on this porch and watch the sunset. And when it's time, we go inside and light the lamp and read until we fall asleep. And the next day, we do it again." "That's it?" "That's everything," she smiled. "I love you, Caleb Mercer." "I love you too, Eliza Harper Mercer. More than all the tracks in Texas." In December, a letter arrived from Margaret. She had finished her first semester at the normal school and had been placed in a teaching internship at a small schoolhouse on the outskirts of Austin. She wrote of her students, of the challenges, of the joy she found in watching children learn. "Mama, I think I understand now why you kept walking. It wasn't just about finding a home. It was about knowing that every step mattered, even the hard ones. I am learning that here, every day. Thank you for teaching me how to walk." Eliza read the letter 3 times. Then she folded it and put it in the drawer with Thomas's ring and the deed and the letter from Richard Harper, the drawer where she kept the history of her heart. On Christmas Eve, the family gathered in the parlor. There was a small tree in the corner, decorated with strings of popcorn and dried berries. Hank Prescott had built a roaring fire. Noah had carved a set of animals for Thomas, a whole ark of them, each one perfect. Rose presented each family member with a drawing she had made. Lily had grown a special poinsettia in a pot, its red leaves brilliant against the dark window. Caleb gave Eliza a new shawl, woolen and soft, dyed a deep blue. "So you'll be warm on the porch," he said. Eliza gave Caleb a book. It was a journal, bound in leather, with blank pages. "For your stories," she said, "the ones you'll tell Thomas someday." He held it like it was made of gold. That night, after the children were asleep, Eliza and Caleb walked out to the garden. The frost had come, and the plants were dormant. But Lily's compost pile steamed gently in the cold air, a reminder that even in winter things were still growing. "Eliza," Caleb said, "I want to tell you something I've never told anyone." "Tell me." "When I was under that horse, before you came, I saw my life pass in front of me. I saw the drought, the banknote, 1,000 empty days. I thought I was ready to go. But then you showed up, and you had that knife, and you told me to stay awake, and I knew, in that moment, that I had been waiting for you my whole life without knowing it." She took his hand. "I had been walking toward you for 8 miles without knowing it. Then I guess we found each other right on time." The stars were out, the winter air was sharp, and in the garden where Lily's bluebonnets would bloom in the spring, they stood together, 2 people who had started as strangers and had become a family. She was home, she was loved, and she would never have to walk that road alone again. This is Clint Dawson, and you've been listening to Frontier Heart Audio. Until next time, keep your heart open and your trails safe.